Hello, welcome to Inventing Civilization, the YouTube channel where we take a closer look at the history of political thought and philosophy. In this episode, Cicero. The Roman Republic was founded in 510 BC and over the course of the next 5 centuries would come to rule the entire Mediterranean. Its system of governance was messy. It had started with a constitution that, above all else, aimed to keep power out of the hands of any single individual, and through the centuries this constitution, much like the empire Rome had now acquired, had grown and evolved into a behemoth of incomprehensible complexity. By the time Cicero was born in 106 BC, the constitution was Rome's greatest weakness. Cicero's lifetime coincided with civil wars, the rise and fall of Julius Caesar, and the definitive transition from republic to empire under Augustus. It was an era that has been called the most tumultuous in the history of Western civilization. We actually know a lot about Cicero. A great deal of his writings, both personal and professional, have survived, and he was the subject of historians and other writers who were his contemporaries. The result of this is that he has been harder to romanticize. A lot of his private correspondence with his good friend Atticus, for example, reveals a certain vanity, egotism, and insincerity. They paint a picture of a politician skilled in scheming and manipulating, hardly the sort of man we're tempted to put on a pedestal, but that's a bit unfair. Above all, Cicero was a self-made man. He was not a native Roman, but he did have Roman citizenship because his tribe had been conquered. He was a member of the middle class and made it to the upper class and the Senate through education, hard work, and an arranged marriage to the daughter of an aristocrat. Cicero proved to be an excellent writer and public speaker. Having studied literature, law, and oratory, he became one of the most skilled lawyers the Republic had ever seen. He later became politically active at the earliest possible opportunity, at the minimum age of 30, when he was elected quaestor in 75 BC. This was a low station, but it did make him a member of the Senate. Having served as aedile in 69 BC and praetor in 66 BC, he reached the pinnacle of his political career in 63 BC when he was elected to the consulship, comparable to the presidency in modern republics, except it was a shared function with a 1-year term only. Having served as consul, Cicero remained a member of the Senate and now wielded indirect influence as a man of great experience with fantastic oratory capabilities. This made him a key figure in the Republic, which soon descended into civil war. He spent the rest of his political career carefully maneuvering between vying factions, led by his desire to restore the constitution. Now, ultimately, this proved to be a battle against the tide. Rome's constitution was doomed, as was its republic. Cicero's tactical political games finally caught up with him when his enemies assumed power in 43 BC, and they wasted no time issuing an order to execute him. Cicero's life came to an end at the age of 63, when he was captured and beheaded near Gaeta. In his final moments, he shed his tactical disposition and showed courage in the face of death. His final words were, "Come here, soldier. There is nothing proper about what you're doing, but at least make sure you cut my head off properly." Cicero's views on the state are not original. His work is based on that of Plato and Aristotle on the one hand, and on the existing Roman constitution on the other. He suggested improvements but did not invent a new political system. Originality is not the reason why Cicero's legacy has endured for so long, but more on that later. Cicero wrote several important works on the subject of politics. The first was De Oratore, in which he explored the importance of education and the ideal statesman. He then moved on to what would become his key work on the subject, De Republica. This book drew heavily on the works of Plato and Aristotle and explored the ideal constitution and the ideal citizen. The third work was called De Legibus and covered the subject of law. And finally, the last book we should consider is De Officiis, which he wrote only just before his death. It deals with virtue and the pursuit of glory. Now, Cicero believed that the Roman constitution was essentially perfect. It was based on natural law, or our inner moral compass, given to us by the gods, if you will. It had been established by wise ancestors and then refined by generations of statesmen. In this, Cicero shows his conservative nature, preferring evolution over revolution. Rome's constitution was a blend of monarchy, the consuls, aristocracy, the Senate, and democracy, the popular assembly. This made it, Cicero believed, the perfect mix of those three basic forms of government that had at this point become well established in Hellenic thought. But how could a republic founded on a perfect constitution possibly end up in such chaos? Cicero seems to suggest that any constitution, no matter how perfect, remains vulnerable to human fallibility. Rome's perfect constitution then could not work unless the republic had capable statesmen. Cicero depicts his ideal statesman, or rector rei publicae, as a well-educated, experienced and conservative leader. The idea is that the statesman is not a lawmaker but a guardian of existing law, and his main responsibility is to ensure the survival and continuation of the state. In order to do so, the statesman would have to possess three key qualities: sapientia, prudentia, and auctoritas. The first is also the most important, and it's one of those words that's rather difficult to translate. Sapientia means wisdom, but it's more than that. It is fundamentally a deep understanding of what it takes to safeguard the state. Without it, the other two virtues were unattainable. Prudentia, meaning foresight, describes the ability to see the bigger picture and the consequences of various courses of action. Among other things, this allows the statesman to identify threats to the state and the common good early on. Finally, auctoritas means simply authority. It's closely related to dignitas, or dignity. It's not really about power, potestas, so much as it is about morality and respect. It's ultimately what makes people follow the statesman. In addition to these three qualities, Cicero would have also expected the statesman to be a great orator, a necessary skill if he were to convince anyone to follow his lead. Now, it's important to understand that this is rather a big deal. It's not a skill you could obtain by following a course in public speaking. Content matters. In De Oratore, Cicero sets out how the ideal orator is very well educated in matters of law and philosophy, as well as rhetoric and oratory. Cicero's ideal orator is a man whose arguments are very hard to refute and whose delivery is flawless. All of this, sapientia, prudentia, auctoritas, and oratory, make the ideal statesman an impartial, acute, insightful, and wise leader. It puts him in the perfect position to maintain concordia, or communal harmony, as well as libertas, or freedom under the rule of law. It allows him to safeguard the balance of power and the continued existence of the state. Now, obviously, Cicero's ideal statesman is rather a tall order. But he makes an excellent point when he convincingly argues that any constitution, no matter how perfect, can be destroyed by incapable statesmen. And that in itself raises questions about imposing requirements for statesmen and their education and experience. Questions that remain unanswered even in today's modern democratic societies. Cicero's work isn't very original, although some of his ideas, like it's the state's duty to protect private property, were entirely new. But it's important for other reasons. Over the course of his life, Cicero produced a comprehensive overview of ancient Greek philosophy in the Latin language. Latin was a richer language than Greek, but it didn't have any of the terminology associated with philosophy. So Cicero invented it. He gave us words such as humanitas, moralis, and essentia, or human nature, moral, and essence in modern English. He was also a very skilled writer. The flow and style of his oratory is beautiful, and it captivated readers throughout the ages to such an extent that Cicero, perhaps more than any other writer, had a profound impact on how the Latin language has come down to us through the ages. The fact that his works were so pleasant to read and that we know so much about him also made sure his ideas were preserved and that they continue to inspire generation after generation. His oratory style has influenced historical figures such as Edmund Burke, Abraham Lincoln, and Winston Churchill, and his views on the mixed constitution had a big influence on the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the formation of the United States. Cicero is a crucial link to our Western past, and his writings are fundamental in understanding the origin of Western civilization. If you'd like to learn more about Cicero, the general rule of thumb would have to be that it's best to stick to books that were published after the mid-20th century. That's because knowledge of the ancient Roman world dramatically improved in the decades before that, and writers from the 19th century often have a limited or even false understanding of ancient Roman politics. The best place to start is with biographies that depict the man and the republic in which he lived. I recommend the works by Dr. Shackleton Bailey, Elizabeth Rawson, and Anthony Everitt. For a closer look at Cicero's political thought, there's a wide range of literature available. 3 authors I can recommend to you are Neil Wood, Jonathan Powell, and Jonathan Zerecki. If you'd like to read Cicero's prose but your Latin is a bit rusty, I recommend you get your hands on the English translations from the Cambridge series or the Loeb editions of the Harvard University Press. And finally, Latin versions of Cicero's work are easily accessible through the Perseus Digital Library. Well, that concludes this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd like to thank you very much for watching it. See you next time. Goodbye.